You guys all ready to go? I'll come with you.
Good morning. It is 8:31. We're going to call the meeting to order. I need a motion to call. I don't remember. No. Okay. We'll start with the roll call.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Richard Beck.
Here.
Stacy Dupree. Michaela Owens.
Here.
Rachel Spear for Tom Laws.
Here.
Cody Homan. Here. Tanya Converse for Alex Yan.
Here.
Bob Callahan. Lindy Lindstrom. Clay Tucker. Michelle Barron. Dan Lister.
Here.
Deb Root.
Here.
Bree Brush. Deanna Dupuis. Nina Schaefer.
Here.
Morgan Besaw.
Here.
Haley Hart. Caitlin Davison.
Here.
Andrew Glassfell.
Here.
Hannah Veal. Lee Belt.
Here.
Troy Behunin.
Present.
Marina Lundy.
Here.
Daryl Romine.
Here.
Greg Bergman. Caleb Hood.
Present.
Ryan McClure.
Present.
Jason Van Gilder.
Here.
Crystal Craig. Clemente Salinas. Mark Stoyer.
Here.
Rob Hartsock.
Here.
Jacob Mack Qualls. Sean Nickel.
Good morning here.
Chelsea Johnson.
Yep.
Joe McMullen. Gabe Finkelstein.
Here.
Michael Toole.
Yes, present.
Aaron Bogus.
Here.
Isaac Josephek. Stephen Hunt.
Here.
Miranda Carson.
Here.
Curtis Lovelace. Cody Lund. Awesome. With that, Madam Chair, we have quorum.
Thank you. That'll bring us to item 2, open discussion and announcements.
Madam Chair, I have an announcement.
Go ahead.
Hello, everybody. My name is Hunter Mulhall. I'm a planner here at Compass. For those of you who don't know me, but I wanted to make an announcement that we are now calling for members of our regional operations work group. It's a work group we've put together in the past to do our transportation systems management operations, intelligent transportation systems, and transportation demand management strategies. So those are either you or your staff members that are involved in traffic operations, things like signal timing, some of the travel informations like the digital messaging signs, technologies type things. I would like your solicitation for members of that group as we will be kicking off the development of our new strategy towards the end of this fiscal year, beginning of next. So we'll kind of start ramping up those conversations about what we want to see in our next strategy. So I'll send a reminder out to RTAC, just kind of soliciting that and with a little bit more information. And that's all I have.
Are there any other announcements?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
In a little bit of a peek behind the curtains, as we prepare for these meetings, us as Compass staff, we do an internal rehearsal, sort of walk through, make sure everything flows. In going through today's meeting, a lot of the questions that we had on some of the earlier action items were actually sort of found their way to be answered by later action items. So with that, I would actually like to make a motion and propose that we modify today's agenda, moving action item 5A, recommend approval draft local federal aid programs, to be the third action item, And move action item 5C, recommend approval to extend delivery deadlines for local federal aid projects to be the first action item. So just flip-flopping those two. We did feel that that might help the conversation and the questions sort of flow a little bit better for the group. So I would like to make that motion.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second by Stephen Hunt. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any
Aye.
opposed? All right, motion carries. We will move forward with the consent agenda. We have one item on the consent agenda to approve the RTAC meeting minutes from February 25th, 2026. Does anyone have any changes, comments on those? None? Okay, then we'll does anyone have a motion to approve?
Madam Chair, this is Stacy Dupree. I'll move to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Stacy. Is there a second? All right, we have a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Right, that is approved. We are, I'm really excited about the special item we have on our agenda today. We have Kittleson and ITD here to present on the South Ada Canyon County Connectivity Study.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of RTAC. My name is Andy Delighten. I'm with Kittleson and Associates. I'm the project manager for the South Ada and Canyon County Connectivity Study. We were trying to get a simpler name, but that's where we ended up. So it's, but we're excited to be able to be here to give an update on the study where we're at. So we'll kind of work through a few things here. I also did want to bring up that a couple folks on the project team are here. So if there's questions and so forth, we'll be able to just work through that. So Mark Heisinger and Matthew Hagan are here with Kittleson and Associates. And then Mark Wasdall is the project manager with Idaho Transportation Department as well. So, thank you. So a few things that we were planning to present today. One, give you a little bit of an overview of the study purpose, why the study is being done, and then get into some of the specific project activities that we've been working on. One, we've completed the existing and future no build conditions effort, kind of a baseline element for the study area. And so we'll provide a little bit of context on that. And then where we are now is working on the future build conditions. And that's really us getting into different scenarios related to new connections in our study area, both on the roadway network side and then also factoring in beyond 2055 type land use scenario to help with testing the different roadway network scenarios. And then I'll wrap up with just next steps. So the study purpose is one, so Idaho Transportation Department kicked this off to look at wanting to understand what new connections might look like in the southern Ada and Canyon County. Specifically, our study area is on the north side is Interstate 84 and then traverses down to the southeast as you get to Blacks Creek interchange. And then connects with Cunamore Road to the west. So that's our kind of eastern and then southern boundary all the way to Beaumont Road and then to State Highway 45 on the west side. So we're looking at a pretty large area. In that, as part of this, the purpose is looking at three distinct corridors. One on the south side is the Cunamore Road extension, looking at that between Interstate 84 and State Highway 45. An extension of a north-south corridor, you can say an extension of State Highway 16 south from Interstate 84 down to Cunamore Road. And then a third part is a connection which has been, all of these have been looked at in kind of different ways, but more recently the State Highway 69 extension from from its terminus down to Cunamore Road. So looking at those and trying to understand what are the effects of that, what from a traffic pattern standpoint, and also what are some of the land use elements that might pop up associated with that. And then in that, we're looking at, once we kind of are modeling that effort, is understanding those traffic patterns and trying to define what do those facilities need when it comes to a corridor type. Is it a freeway? Is it an expressway? Is it an arterial? What is that? And in there, what is the kind of access control associated with that when you start looking at different connections to the local street system? So agency involvement to date. So Idaho Transportation Department is the lead agency. We have significant support on this project from Compass in terms of modeling support, working very heavily with Mary Ann and modeling the different roadway network and land use scenarios as part of this effort. And then several other agencies within the study area are involved as well. We've met several times. We just had our 4th meeting with the project team yesterday, and then we've had a couple meetings with our kind of study group. And so we have 2 groups that are working to help advise and guide and provide direction on the project. So one of our first work tasks was to complete an existing and future no build conditions evaluation. So in that existing we're using year 2025. So just recently matching with the travel demand model, as well as just recent traffic counts that we collected as part of this effort. And then looking out in the future, year 25. So looking at the future year 2055 no build conditions as part of that. And we're evaluating that to be able to just understand what's changing in the valley, and based on that, is there anything that pops up when it looks at from a need standpoint for looking at connectivity in the south area. The other aspect is, as part of that, is we have a document that's out that's Tech Memo number 1. So it summarizes all this information, and I'll present a few slides just on some of the highlights of that. So what you see here, we did 2 kind of distinct analyses as part of this effort. One is on roadway segments. So looking at all of the roadway segments within our study area and doing an analysis on that to understand how do the projections or how do those facilities operate from a level of service standpoint, specifically capacity related measure. And so this is information that's coming out from the Compass travel demand model and looking at the analysis for specific segments in our study area. So there's a handful of corridors that pop up where, that are either level service D or level service F, specifically on kind of the northern part of the study area, hovering around Interstate 84. As you look out into the future, year 2055, we start to pop up a number of much more significant number of locations related to level service D to F conditions, Interstate 84 specifically, but there are other corridors that start to pop up within the study area. Then we did another piece of analysis looking at specific intersections. And so this looks at a detailed intersection analysis at most of the intersections, or at least major intersections within the study area. And in there, under today's conditions, the orange, red, or yellow indicate the intersections that either have some deficiency related to level service or some deficiency related to intersection capacity. And then when you pop that out into 2055, and this includes all our analysis associated with 2055, in particular the intersections, includes any of the programmed improvements that are planned, specifically Ada County Highway District CIP, and then other programmed improvements in the area that would be or anticipated to be in place. And so this still, as you get to this level in 2055, that number of intersections increases significantly. So it starts to present that case of, connectivity. There's obviously problems at a number of intersections, some of the roadway segments, and then starting to think about, well, can new connections help reduce some of these challenges? So summary of our existing and future no-build conditions. This is just a snapshot, just so you have a few stats. So in terms of land use or demographic side, so it's about a 70% increase in population and employment in our study area. And this is all coming from the approved demographics from the CIM. The second piece, daily traffic volumes increased significantly. When you look at a couple of corridors, Interstate 84, State Highway 69, and then State Highway 45, all were ones that are kind of key ones in our study area, start to grow, add some pretty significant jumps in terms of daily traffic volumes. When I say that is you start thinking about additional lanes, type components because of the thresholds that are being hit. The existing conditions, when you look at just the number of intersections, highlighted that there were 39 that were exceeded level service and capacity standards under existing conditions. When you forecast that out to 2055, it went to 60. And related to roadway lane miles, when we did our segment analysis, we had 42 lane miles that were above level service D, and then that increased to 281 lane miles by year 2055, specifically all in our study area. So the next task that we are working on, so we created that kind of baseline condition for existing and future conditions, is starting to look at build conditions to test different roadway network and land use scenarios. And so the purpose of this effort, again, we're looking at year 2055. We're evaluating, and I'll talk on the next slide of the specific roadway network scenarios that we're looking at, as well as a brief hit on the land use scenario here. And with that, in that evaluation, then it'll allow us to compare the results of what does that compare back to existing conditions? How does that compare back to just the current 2055 no build conditions? Specifically, the roadway network scenarios under the current land use projections. When you do that, what happens? And then we're looking at a second land use scenario, which is beyond 2055. And so that new land use scenario, we're still working through that component, but we've engaged with the land use agencies in the study area, as well as the transportation agencies to talk about that. We've been working with Compass, as well as hearing about different development projects that might be in the works within this area, and then taking into account where you see changes in potential new roadway connections. What might be the potential increase in population and employment in those areas? So I don't have a slide or specific on that element today, but it is something that we're working on, and we'll be bringing that information in. Will be in our tech memo number 2 as part, and I think at a future update, if Compass RTAC is interested, I'd be happy to present on that. But I will go into the specific details, just a snapshot of the roadway network scenarios that are being looked at. And so we've kind of defined this as there's 2 scenarios that we're modeling. One is scenario 1, which is a east-west corridor from Black's Creek Interchange at Interstate 84 on the east to Beaumont Road connection with State Highway 45 approximately. That roadway new connection includes, we're looking at both a different facility types. So is that for a number of lanes, as well as speed components associated with that, and then whether it's in the connections with public streets are at grade or grade separated options. And then included with that scenario is also the extension of State Highway 69 to that east-west corridor. So we're working with Compass and we've modeled that component in kind of a number of kind of subset elements to understand what traffic patterns happen when you make that connection under the current land use scenario and then the future beyond 2055 scenario. And then the second scenario that we have that we're modeling is that connection between Interstate 84 and this east-west corridor. We're kind of just north-south corridor, kind of defining it here. Again, similar aspect to the east-west corridor, looking at grade and grade separated options, probably leaning more on the grade separated options in a lot of the scenarios within that section based on some of the initial forecast demand that's coming out of the modeling efforts. And this basically, and then same kind of thing, looking at it from a expressway to kind of freeway type element in terms of the facility. And so this, the land use effort, the roadway network elements, and the analysis and evaluation, that's all going to be summarized in our next tech memo, which we're working through. So I'll kind of wrap this up with just to give you a snapshot on kind of where the study is going. So right now we're in the middle of that effort. We're looking at tech memo number 2, probably wrapping up in June is our target. We'll probably have a draft sometime next in May. And we'll be meeting with our project team and the study group to talk through that. And then a final report, we're looking at August to bring, kind of tell the story of what we're finding from the 2 different technical memorandum and just the discussions to date for the study. So with that, I'll stop and see if there's any questions and turn it over to Madam Chair.
Thank you. I do have a question. Is this looking at scenarios 1 and 2 or 1 or 2?
Madam Chair, so we are looking how the modeling is done. We have one where we're just looking at scenario 1, just to understand that connection. And then everything under scenario 2 includes both.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Sorry for that. For that detail being left out.
Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
So it sounds like within each scenario, there might be sub scenarios. Is that right? Or are you going to run like full scenarios with grade separated and not grade separated? And I guess that's the question.
Yeah, there, in terms of, there are a number of sub scenarios. I think right now, it's 12. Yeah, we're at like 12 scenarios right now on the roadway network going through. And then in there, we'll start piecing out the information to help inform kind of the story related to what we're finding out of that.
Yes, Terry. Did you get that?
Now, so the tech memo 1 is very detailed. It has the demographic information that's in there, as well as just the supporting analysis and how we came up with the forecasts associated with that. And then tech memo 2, as we build that document, it will have the same elements, whether it's in the body of the memo or as an attachment, that information will be in there.
Deanna, did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. And then I have a kind of a follow-up question. With the scenarios, will there be any kind of analysis, and maybe this is in the no build scenario, but like analysis on what these connections could do to existing roads and, existing cities?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Deanna, the analysis is doing kind of comparisons. So it'll have information related to the change in traffic patterns. So we'll have that between the different scenarios as needed. We also are doing in the build condition effort, detailed analysis where it's needed to do that comparison back to the information that was presented for Tech Memo 1 related to existing and future year no build conditions.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I'm just curious I'm from Boise, so curious on how this could impact Boise's development pattern and then also spur unplanned growth along the corridor. I think CUNA's, I would maybe refer to CUNA on this, but their area of impact not stretching this entire corridor, neither does City of Boise's. And so what would happen in that kind of unclaimed jurisdiction along these freeways?
Yeah, that's the component, like in this case with land use elements, we're essentially testing elements. If this happened in terms of population growth in this area, generally, this is the kind of result. If you had this employment change, this is what might happen related to traffic patterns in this area. It's a lot of what if scenarios as part of this effort, but to help inform what those facility types might be as part of planning. It's not an absolute. It's just testing.
Yeah, and I'm curious about like the induced demand for new housing or land use change in areas that aren't currently planned for growth because of this capital investment in infrastructure. So yeah, very interesting. Looking forward to seeing the memos and the studies.
Great, thank you.
Madam Chair, I wanted to jump in with some background on why we did this study in the first place. A couple of years ago, approximately our Idaho Transportation Board, with the State Highway 16 extension funded and under construction, wanted to know what's the next big project we're looking at in the valley and within the district. And so this is part of that background work to identify where we might need big projects. Also, we had a push from City of Cuna that was looking at the State Highway 69 extension. And actually the project name was First State Highway 69 Extension Study. And we ended up changing it to the current long name because we wanted to look at the entire network and connectivity of it south of the interstate. And we'd also had as a sidebar, a member service request with Compass for a lesser scoped internal, means Marianne doing all the work, for a similar look on Northeast Canyon, Northwest Ada County, north of State Highway 44 connectivity study. So that's our efforts to identify what we need 30 years out so we can start planning in that direction. I've been around for a while, and so a lot of ideas come back eventually. And ironically, this corridor at Cunamora was identified back in the 1920s, 1930s as the Old Oregon Trail Southern Branch. The state actually in 1928 bought 100 foot of right-of-way for 6 miles between the junction of US 30, now Interstate 84, just half a mile southeast of the Blacks Creek interchange, west 6 miles to Vista Road. So it's an idea they've had for a long time, and 100 years later, we might do something with it. Eventually, we get around to things. But
So, Mark, in those 12 scenarios that y'all have floating around, is one of those just if 69 gets extended?
Yes. Yeah. No, Madam Chair, we do have that in there as part of just that as one scenario, one subset.
Madam Chair,
Go ahead.
maybe one other question. Mark, thanks for your background. That's helpful. Because I guess I was wondering if there was a specific purpose and need that the study was trying to address. I mean, you showed all of the traffic congestion that was in the valley, but I guess I think in the past when there's been talk of southern bypasses, it's sometimes been focused on freight movements, getting freight movements out of the center of the valley. I don't know if there is a specific movement we're trying to mitigate with this, or if it's just general traffic, kind of building on some of the other comments, given that the alignment doesn't directly serve many of the kind of population or employment centers, well, Micron on the east, but I guess I was wondering if there was a specific traffic pattern or purpose that you were looking at, or just this looks like the next connection that would be needed in the network.
Madam Chair, maybe I could take that one.
Go ahead.
So Mark also mentioned the North study. So I think similar to that, what we were trying to determine first step is, does this serve as a state highway, or is this more of a local issue that needs to be addressed? So I think the first step was just model this out, see what the demand on the entire network is, and then come forward with some sort of analysis to help to either justify us to take the next step, go back to our board and say, yep, this probably would be a beltway, an expressway, a freeway, or this is an ADHD issue to solve. I think that's where we started.
And Madam Chair, just to add to Aaron's response, we are looking at freight. So that is a component, just that I didn't pull that out as one of the findings, but we do have that in kind of documented in existing and future no build conditions to then, as we get into the modeling effort, does anything stand out from that standpoint?
One of the issues that we've seen is that there's a lot of development slated for Elmore County residential, and this would be obviously an early access point for anyone in those developments driving west. So there's a thought there that could be a driver also of some of the traffic that we're expecting to increase on Kitamura.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion or questions? All right, thank y'all so much.
Thank you.
We will move on to action item C. Recommend approval to extend delivery deadlines for local federal aid. Tony Tisdale.
Hi, thank you, Madam Chair. Hold on, let me get arranged a little bit. All right, so this item is for the extended deadlines for local federal aid projects. To the right place. For introduction, we will provide why the March 1st delivery date is important, and then review the unobligated projects and recommended deadlines that are recommended today. Open that for discussion on any of these projects or the process, and then hopefully get a recommendation for your approval. So first of all, why is March 1st important? The federal aid money that comes into a specific fiscal year must be used and not used. It doesn't have to be spent that fiscal year, but it has to be obligated that fiscal year, or it gets taken, or we call it a sweeping. So, and it gets reapportioned to a project that could use it immediately. And so this builds in a little bit of extra time. If we have a plan by March 1st, if needed, we can reprogram some of these funds to other projects that could move forward faster, because we do have those hard deadlines later on in the year. So we want to make sure that this region does not lose any of this federal aid money that's coming in, because we cannot carry it over. So one thing to keep in mind as we're preparing projects for obligation, it's not that we have this money, okay, let's obligate it. There's a lot of steps to take in order to be able to obligate the money. This is an example of a construction obligation to get to final design in your plan specification and engineer's estimates package, or PS&E. Once you get that submitted, it goes through a review and corrections process. Then you need a state local agreement. And it usually takes 4 to 8 weeks by the time you submit that paperwork in order to get to the obligation phase. So it's not something that's immediate. Design only takes a state local agreement. Those are fairly easy to obligate. Right-of-way funds, you need to have your right-of-way plans as well as your environmental document completed. So there are steps to take in order to be ready. I do want to point out, we brought this slide, introduced you to it last month, the holds for off the top. I just want to remind you that the off the top funds, we have moved into the year previous so that we can obligate them at the very end of the fiscal year, so that by October 1st, those funds are ready. So we're talking a little bit about those. Those are intentionally on hold. And because we have a limitation in our obligation authority, we know these are not going to be obligated till the end of the year, but that's on purpose. So we'll get into the extension requests. So we have about 19 projects this year, which is probably a record for us. Not necessarily anybody's fault or any reason. A lot of it is because our funds came in really late through Congress. We have the Vista project right there in the middle of the list is the bulk of our money in this region. There is 2 pages to this list. We think that that one is for sure going to make it by May, and that's not an issue. So the remaining funding that we have in here will probably be actually obligated later, but we want to make sure that we can get these input into ITD system so that they can obligate them as funds are available, and we don't end up losing any money. And I'll go on to the next page. You'll see here the September 10th deadline is kind of the hold. That's when we anticipate those that are on hold for a reason. Everything else is pretty much June 1st, and June 1st is going to be kind of my hard deadline. If we don't have these by June 1st, it's going to start creating some issues. And so I'll be in touch with all these agencies as the projects are getting developed. We'll get them input for obligation as early as possible. The only one right now, I'm going to go backwards a little bit, back to the 10th Avenue, the very top project is listed for August 1st. That one had a little bit of a right-of-way upset, I guess. There was some right-of-way agreements that were needed that were unaccounted for or not known that they were needed. And so I know the city of Caldwell is working very hard with a consultant right now to get the agreements needed for that. We think it's going to make it. I'll be on top of that one. That's kind of the one that's I'm a little bit concerned about, but I think the rest of these will move along quite swiftly. So just know you'll hear from me a lot if you're on this list, and that's just the way it will be for the next couple of months. So I'll stop here for any specific questions about any of these projects or why they're running behind or what the process is. And this is the recommended motion. Go ahead, Cody.
I move that RTAC recommend that the Compass Board of Directors approves extending the delivery deadlines as recommended.
Thank you. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Right, motion carries. Thank you, Tony. We'll move to item B, recommend balancing the transportation management area.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee, and thank you for letting us rearrange this a little bit. I think it does make a lot more sense like this, so hopefully it's a little bit smoother than it was in practice, right? So this one is for recommending balancing. Hopefully you remember last month we left about $1.7 million on the table in the surface transportation block grant program. So we're back to help get those funds programmed. And as far as the previous item, most of these that we're adding today or increasing, advancing, all of those will join that extended deadline list for September 10th will be the deadline for those, but we will work to get them on the list as soon as possible. So today we'll review the balancing process in general and also the request and recommendations, and then we'll have discussion and recommendation. We do have some ties today, so probably a little bit more discussion than we do sometimes, but I'll appreciate hearing your opinions on this. So the rationale priorities, we target all the funding toward construction as the #1 priority. We want to keep those projects moving and make the most difference to the region. Then use funds for right-of-way or design, and the main purpose of all of these is to keep projects moving and to make sure that we have a functional program. We do have priorities for programs that originate in other outside programs besides the ones that we manage here at Compass. If they're eligible, we could still add them with TMA funding, but they would be a lower priority. And then adding new projects is also an eligible priority. We don't have to hit this one very often, but we are doing that today because we such great bids at ACHD and it had some amazing opportunities to add some new projects. So today, the balancing request, releasing of funds from those low bids, the total was almost $7 million that we had over the last couple of months. So we have needs to increase funds, advance funds, add some new projects and scope of projects, and also some balancing reprogramming, and I'll cover that. So first, a little bit of background. Back on March 17th, Compass Executive Committee recommended to increase off the top funds starting in 2027. Our executive director went to the Compass board as he's been making his rounds, talking to agencies. There have been several things come up, and this was one of them, that the off the top funds haven't been adjusted since 2012. Or I think 2009 was the last time the funds were actually adjusted. In 2001, Commuter Ride and Compass were added, as it wasn't really called off the top at the time, but they received some additional SDBG money to help operate those programs. In 2012, that process was formalized through the Compass funding policy. And then in 2021, VRT's Safe Route to School project was added, and it also increased the funding from $218,000 to $280,000. So they got a pretty big increase in 2021, which starts in 2027. The same amounts are included all these years since 2009, but the increase in inflation has been anywhere from like 67% to 98%, depending on which source you look at. And we haven't made any adjustments to these off the top funds. And these are the funds that are going to pay staff and programming and commuter ride. It's for marketing as well. So there was a need to increase. Our executive committee requests or recommended that this move forward. They didn't approve this action, but they recommended that it be considered in these actions. It will be going to the Compass board for final approval. So these actions for a one-time increase of 45% for Compass off the top, 50% for one time for commuter ride, as well as adding 2% annually for each of these three programs. Again, remember that off the top, the reason we're talking about this now, it would start in 2027, but we're advancing those projects to actually obligate at the very end of 2026. So it affects this program as well. So going into the funding policy, this is what it actually looks like as far as the increases. For the TMA, there's two different policies. The transportation management area is the Boise urban area. It would increase Compass from $232,000 to $336,000. ACHD commuter ride from $220 to $330, and then safe routes would get that 2%, so $280 to $285. The percentages for the remaining programs will be affected somewhat because the off the top would affect what's remaining, but it's a fairly minimal amount. The large urban is going to be a little bit more difficult to implement because it is shared money with the rest of the state's MPOs. And so we would incorporate this as we can, but this is what it would look like if we could incorporate immediately. $232,000 for Compass would increase to, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong one, $99,000 would increase to $143,000. Commuter ride would increase from $55,000 to $82,000, and safe routes would be adding $1,000 for that one, so a minimal increase. And then no changes to the split of the remainder of the funds. So getting into the balancing request, I just wanted to explain all that so you would know why we're asking for these additional costs in the balancing. So we had almost $1.7 million. We also received the funding allocations specifically that Congress passed in March, early March, end of February. And so those have been posted now, and we were slightly over programmed for the Transportation Alternative Program. And we actually have a little bit additional money through the Carbon Reduction Program. So those first couple of items are just moving funds between programs to balance that out and make the most flexibility of funding. The next three are the increases we just talked about that Executive Committee recommended moving forward with that one-time increase. So what you're looking at here is only the increase, not the total amount of the project. And then we received a late request from City of Boise, so the pathway at Spoils Bank. Their request, the letter is not in your packet, but we've got Nina here to answer any questions if there are some. The total request was 750,000, but it was broke over several phases. The 250,000 is for design increase, and they needed 250,000 for right-of-way and 250,000 for additional construction. And this was based on when they started design, they found that one of the segments is not able to move forward as the application suggested. There were some constraints in that area, and so they're asking to move that segment, and it's going to cost a little bit more to design it, and they'll need a little bit of right-of-way, and the cost is a little bit more. So that's what that one is. You don't have a lot of background on that. We can provide the letter if you would like to see it. The next is the Greenbelt connection near 52nd Street. This converted to an Ada County project from Garden City. It was originally programmed in 2028 for 285,000 for design. After talking with LTAC and comparing with similar projects, notably the Eagle Road bike bridge, they recommended that Ada County asked for a little bit more money for this design. So Ada County requested to increase by 387,000 and advance the design. So that ends up being 652,000, moving from 28 to 2026. The next one is the pedestrian improvements at US 2026 and 32nd Street. It had design originally starting in 2028, and ACHD requested to advance that to 2026. And then the next four projects are new scopes that some of them have existing key numbers, but it would be adding work that was not originally intended. So those would all be tied, and we would need some input from you. I have staff recommendation. I'll explain. I don't normally provide this, but there's a lot behind the scenes going on with other things. So I wanted you to know my thoughts. It doesn't have to remain this way, but this was the best plan I could come up with to keep projects moving. So the transit rolling stock infrastructure is additional funding that Valley Regional Transit requested for phase 2 of their farebox implementation and replacement project. The total cost in the Boise urban area is 1.3 million. On this one, I am recommending the 70,000, which is the minimum amount that could start this phase of the project. VRT has some plans that could work to get the project started. It will remain on the needs list for possible additional funding in the future. The Compass planning, as Craig was going around talking to folks, there was a need for a study and 2 additional tools. He really felt the need for kind of a time-sensitive need for this transportation expectation poll, which a lot of the time people are saying, well, we know the public thinks this or they support this, but we don't have hard data to prove that. And so he felt that is a very important poll to take, which will help all of you as well in future grants and other funding opportunities. That's expected to be 400,000. Fiscal impact tool update, as most of you know, that it didn't end up when we built the tool to begin with. We thought we were going to be able to share it with all of you, and we weren't able to do that in the end. And so we wanted to increase the usage of this tool and update it to make it more useful to our member agencies. And the performance measure framework is a tool that helps us with performance project selection and looking at all of our goals, the federal goals, and how projects are selected. So that's expected to be about 250,000. So the most important at this point is the public expectation poll, which is about 400,000. So that's the minimum that we could move forward with on this one. The 5th Street design project in Boise, ACHD requested to add this project as a design only at this point. It's almost $1.8 million for design through this process. And then the next item with the 2027 to 2033 tip, if this project were to receive 50,000 now and use the rest of it as advanced construct, we have a plan in place to fully convert all of those funds to federal aid throughout the next 6 years. So, and it's also advanced construct, so it could move up faster as funds become available. So the last project on there, the 50th Street, that was part of ACHD's RAISE design bundle. It was ready to go. They had also applied for TAP funds as an ACHD project. And we were just notified last Thursday or two Thursdays ago that it is recommended for funding through the TAP statewide program. So that one can be taken off the list. So that's kind of the long version of all of this, and I'll stand for any questions. We'll go back to that slide. I'm sure there are some.
Tony, can you go back to the slide where you mentioned the off the top and my words, some of the collateral damage? That one. Do you know, so the pathways there is what I'm asking about. We've talked for years about that not being enough. That it's basically one project regionally and it's hard to do anything with that amount of money. And you mentioned all those on the bottom are going to be going down. Do you know how much of an impact that would be to pathways?
I have it, but I don't have it with me right now. I've got a whole worksheet that shows how much goes to that. Right now, we're very underfunded in the pathway side. We're kind of lucky in that we've been able to add some really big projects, like $4 million projects for the city of Boise, because we were able to combine this funding with transportation alternative as well as carbon reduction. So we were able to kind of cobble together a pretty big project, even though that the SDBG portion was pretty small. So we're not meeting our goals right now in this program for pathways.
That's fair then. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Are the Compass, the ACHD commuter ride and the current policy amounts, those are set dollars and not percentage of the money coming in?
That is true. And all the way back to I think 2009 was the last time these amounts were changed. But it started in 2001, and so it changed in 2009 slightly, not much. But it hasn't changed since then. It's been that same amount of money.
And have you tracked what percentage that was at the time versus what percentage it is now?
I did actually look at that, and it's do you remember, Craig? I can't remember what the percentage was, but we'll get him to weigh in.
Yeah, thank you. So two things. We don't know exactly, I don't know off the top of my head exactly what the percentage was, but obviously it's gone down quite a bit because in that same time, the total amount of SDBG that has been coming to the region has been increasing, 2 to 4% every year. And there have been multiple reauthorizations in that time frame as well. And each time that happens, there's a bump also. The other thing I'll just note, it's just a date difference, but sorry, it's actually 2007 that the number's been fixed at. So we're coming up on 20 years with absolutely no change in that number. And so that's part of why I went to the executive committee seeking their okay to move forward with this.
Can I follow up? Would it be okay to change those off the top amounts to a percentage of the STPG money in case that money doesn't continue to increase?
So if I could, yeah, I'd say basically that's what we're proposing. I mean, it's not a flat rate percentage, but with the moving forward, once we do this one-time adjustment, then moving forward, we would be adjusting it following the same inflation rate that we use for all the other projects in the STBG program by 2% a year. If that were to change, then, we'd revisit it. If all of the state and all the other MPOs agreed that we needed a lower number, we'd be able to make that adjustment as well. So we keep that consistent with everything else that's in the program. The other thing I'll just note, and the reason why I wouldn't recommend at this point trying to make it like a flat rate adjustment is because that number is somewhat dependent on the Surface Transportation Block Grant Funds amount is somewhat dependent on what happens with federal reauthorization, which we expect to change, but we don't know what that's going to be yet. Once that change happens, we will probably, I could certainly see a likelihood that we would be seeking to change this structure a little bit as well. But we're still, at a minimum, we're like probably 8 months away from knowing that, but more realistically, it's probably 1 year to 2 years.
If I could continue, would it be possible to do these as a one-time increase, but not include the 2% annually change so that if the STBG does not, if more federal funds don't continue to increase, which they might not, then we're not, a 2% increase over these over a number of years could easily disproportionately move more money to this than.
So the recommendation from RTAC, obviously you're able to make whatever recommendation you'd like. I do think that realistically, if you just sort of look at the history of what has happened every time there's been a reauthorization, the number's never gone backwards. It's always been an increase. So the question, and it's usually more than just 2% as well. The question really is whether the reason I hesitate to recommend any more sort of structural type change is that there are proposals out there that would dramatically restructure the way that planning funds are distributed for projects. And were that to pan out, I could envision a scenario where this is no longer necessary, at least for the Compass portion. And so it's just, there's a lot of unknowns right now, but setting the policy up, this is the recommendation that I made and took to the executive committee. Obviously, RTAC is free to act as it chooses.
If there is any discomfort, just generally as an RTAC with the 2%, there could also be the compromise of 2% annually or less if STGB fund percentage is less. You can write anything into a policy. So would that give you?
It would, that might be more complex than just saying the 45% with, and then recognizing that we could revisit this as STBG gets reauthorized on what kind of percentage in the years forward.
Yeah, if I could, we could also, I'd be fine with just tying that to whatever, just say, we're using 2%. The policy doesn't need to be 2%. The policy could actually be using the agreed upon inflation rate with ITD and other MPOs for Surface Transportation Block Grant Fund projects, which right now is 2%. But it could be tied to that. I don't know how frequently we revisit it here. Okay.
It's actually written in the request for, to match what the construction increase would be, which happens to be 2% right now.
So I guess what that means is and as you see the table extend out, we're continuing to use 2% right now because that's the number that we have in place and that's the number that we use for everything.
But the policy would actually be to raise it at the construction inflation rate. Would it accomplish the same thing to simply change the allocation amount to a percentage of the money received?
Well, it's possible that the total amount of surface transportation block grant funds that becomes available to the region could increase faster than that. And we don't necessarily need to see a change in what we're receiving. And so that could actually put us into a situation where, yes, as the director of Compass, I would love to see more revenue come in. We can do a lot more with more revenue, but that's not the goal of this. And so I'd say just stick with the off the top and then tie the balance or tie, future years to whatever the inflation rate is.
Thank you. That's helpful. I think I would support it as shown with the provision that the 2% annually is actually the cost of construction adjustment annually. Thank you.
Was there a question online? Thought I saw a hand up. Is there? It went away. Okay, I'm not crazy. Is there any other discussions or questions?
Madam Chair, just a little bit more clarification. If some of you may be newer and not really be familiar, but the IIJA, or current authorization bill, expires in September of 2026. So this September, we're expecting a new authorization bill. It could be absolutely different, or it could be very similar. We don't know what it's going to be yet. We're pretty sure at this point that we're not going to have a new bill by September 30th. So we'll probably have a continuing resolution for some amount of time. And then once we have this new bill, this is how it happens every 4 to 6 years. You start over, basically. It's like you get used to the current rules and then everything changes and then you refigure out what everything is. And so when that authorization bill comes in, we'll be relooking at everything.
Ready for motion? Can I make a motion to,
Yes.
you have the recommended motion? Motion to accept the RTAC TMA balancing actions as discussed.
Second.
Second from Stephen. Is there any discussion? Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you, Tony. Now we'll move to 5A, approval of draft local federal aid programs.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. It's a good thing that one passed because this one is built on those assumptions. So we had to assume something, right, in order to move forward when you've got a lot of things going at the same time. So today I'm before you to recommend the draft local federal aid programs. These are the programs that Compass manages here for the TMA and large urban. So today we'll go through the process, the funding plan by summary by mode and summary by program, and then also offer time for discussion and questions. And there likely will still be a lot of those, and that's fine. So as you know, the resource development team is all about bringing in money to the region. So it starts with our member agency needs through Communities in Motion 2050, goes through those Compass applications, and then we're right now at the funding some of those additional needs through this process. So the whole process is based on many Compass policies. And we have the Communities in Motion 2050 funding policy, which has the increased recommendation. The balancing policy for surface transportation block grant, transportation alternative program, and the carbon reduction program. We have a funding eligibility policy, which provides which types of projects are eligible and specifically geography for the different types of funding. And then we also have a tip update policy that's kind of overarching for this particular process. And this is summarized with this information here. We first look at removing any advanced construct. That's why I was talking about earlier that advanced construct is one of the highest priorities, because if that's not converted to federal aid, it could be a really big burden on you guys, our member agencies. So the next thing is converting local funds to federal if possible and if it's appropriate. If the application stated that local funds would be used for a project, we won't convert it. But if it's added because we didn't have enough federal money, we will try to convert those local funds. And then changes based on new estimates or also adding that 2% inflation for the construction phase. The reason we do this is because as we do balancing and we move funds from like 28 to 26, if we were using actual increased funding for project estimates based on inflationary factors, we would have to adjust all those amounts before we moved them across years. And so what we do instead is we reduce the amount of money that's available, we budget to that, and then we inflate it for the final reports later. So this is the same thing Idaho Transportation Department does. It makes it a lot smoother when we're balancing throughout the year. The federal agencies require us to show projects in inflated terms, so we have a process built in for that. But for our purposes, we reduce the amount that's available and keep all of those at current dollar format. So we add that 2% inflation so that those projects keep up with inflation as we go through, and then adding new projects by the rank order that you approved last month. So the funding sources specifically that we're looking at today are the Surface Transportation Block Grant. Those are the most flexible. They can do the most types of work throughout the region on transportation. The Transportation Alternative Program is basically non-motorized transportation, mainly focused in our area on sidewalks and pathways. There are other eligible activities, but this is typically what is applied for. Carbon reduction program reduces transportation emissions, and this is in our area mainly also based on sidewalks, pathways, it can be public transportation, and for the state, they are focused on truck parking. So for the Boise urban area, that is the transportation management area. This is a direct allocation to the area, so a lot easier for us to manage these funds, and it is all three of these funding sources. In the Nampa urban area, called the large urban area, these are shared allocation with other MPOs of similar size throughout the state. And these are mainly the surface transportation block grant. Carbon reduction programs started out as kind of managed by the MPO. It's since converted more to an ITD led process, but we are still highly involved in those projects. So summary of the applications, as you're looking at these, the peach projects are recommended for funding in the Boise urban area, and the gray ones are recommended for funding in the Nampa urban area. So the roadway project is recommended at this time. Alternative transportation, both of those are recommended for funding. And then 4 of the 5 projects for studies and special projects are recommended for funding to move forward. We'll cover those in a little bit more detail. Again, this funding policy we included, since the one-time increase is included in balancing for 2026 for the 27 work. It's just the 2% increase that was carried forward in this process. So we're talking right now only about the transportation management area for the next couple of slides here. I need my notes for this. All right, so off the top, I'm going to give you kind of the high level summary of what's happening with programming. And I did want to mention, we had some major technical difficulties with uploading the worksheet, and that's like I call it the Skittles worksheet, if you ever see the real colorful worksheet. We had it up and it had an error in it to the favor of the program. And then we also got the City of Boise request for additional funding. And so I needed to update, but it would not update on the file online. So if you're online and need it, let me know, we can get it to you. We've got handouts here if you want to look through that. So I'll try to make this quick, but we'll stop for any questions. So off the top, we're increasing the executive committee recommendation. We also increased Compass in 2027 by adding $250,000 to help with the cost of those studies and tools. It doesn't fully fund it, but it helps get it there a little bit more. You'll notice at the very bottom, under studies and special projects, we're also delaying one of the projects in 2027 that offsets part of that cost. And then adding the off the top projects in 2033. If you have one of those, you'll remember we had a one key number for all years. That's been getting complicated to track these projects, so we're breaking all of them out in different key numbers. And so that should be a little bit easier to track. The local network improvement, we adjusted the federal funding amounts to account for increase of off the top funds. And also added the Fifth Street project. So we talked earlier about adding that $50,000 for design for ACHD, or we're also adding the 3 construction projects, and they will be fully funded with federal funding. Pathway off system, delaying right-of-way for Federal Way and Broadway. City of Boise requested to delay that right-of-way from 26 to 27. They wouldn't be ready to obligate this year. Increasing right-of-way and construction for Spoils Bank, right-of-ways in 27. It's advanced construct, but we're able to offset those later on. In 2028, it was added through federal funding. Delay West Glenwood from 27 to 2030. This was at the request of ITD as it's a companion project. It doesn't match the year that ITD's project is in, but we knew it wasn't going to happen in 2027. And 2030 was the first place we could put it. So we will still be trying to match those years up with ITD as we move forward with the programming in future years. Advanced design for Reidenbaugh Canal from 29 to 27. That's also a City of Boise project. Add 43rd Street in 2027 and Kent Street in 2030. Those are the 2 new projects that ACHD requested. Did you have a question? No? Okay, public transportation capital, adjust the federal funding to account for the increase in off the top, so that those are adjusted slightly. Add the VRT capital project in 2033. And as I mentioned, we are requesting to delay the fuel study that was originally in 2027 to preliminary development to help offset some of that additional cost, and then add the Compass bike ped counter replacements and data collection pilot in both in 2031. So the funding goals, this is where we stand. We have a little bit more control over these funding as they come in, so we're really close on our goals here. You'll notice we have about 3% that's not programmed. Some of that is kind of in the wings waiting on ACHD's future projects that will need design at some point. So most of that will be going into the local network, but we're a little over on studies and special projects. That's mainly because in, I think it's 2029 and 2030, we have, or 2030 and 2031, we have the household travel study that's required for updating the model. So that's about $1.5 million, which is a really high project for this program, but it's required. And we need to program that project. So we're really close on TMA goals. So the CIM funding policy for large urban, we've already discussed this, so I don't want to go into it, but again, we have to go through the balancing process with the rest of the state. So everything from here forward is a recommendation. We will try to work these in, but it still has to go through additional balancing process. So for off the top, increasing for the executive committee recommendation and adding the project for 2031. We don't add projects in preliminary development for this program because funds are so limited. We're also breaking out those numbers, key numbers for each year in this program as well. Local network improvements, we will try to add that Middleton Road and Nampa Caldwell Boulevard project for Nampa. There are no pathway public transportation changes. Studies and special projects, adding the 10-lane and Cartier Road safety audit for Nampa and the bicycle and pedestrian counter for Compass. Those are all in preliminary development at this point. It's going to depend on what can move out of preliminary development into a year. There's a lot of regulations and rules about how that happens, so we're not positive what will stick. For the goals, we're a little bit high in local network. We've had several projects that we used to have a goal for capital, 50% capital, 50% maintenance, and they've been working their way through. So we're pretty heavy in local network, but as those projects, I think 2 of them are scheduled for 2027, as they start falling off of the programming balances, then we'll have room to add some more projects.
100.
Yes. Am I off?
96 plus 5 would be more than 100.
I will double check that. I must have a formula error. Okay, I'll get that fixed for the next presentation. Okay, got that noted. I will fix it, but it's still gonna be close because we don't have a whole lot of pathways or studies and special projects in the large urban area. Oh, I'm sorry, off the top will not be counted. So off the top comes first, and then the 100% would be the next 3. Is that, okay. And then next steps, we've got April 2nd, we'll be going to the Urban Balancing Committee, and that's where we'll present the Nampa and Caldwell urban area changes. And then we'll come back to you and let you know how that turns out. Then on April 27th, the Compass Board will get a similar presentation to this. That's where they would approve the local programs as well as the increase to off the top. In May, you'll review the entire transportation improvement program, hopefully. We'll see how ITD does with all the changes that could possibly be coming through our legislature. We anticipate being able to bring you all of ITD's projects, all of Valley Regional Transit's projects, the whole program in May. And then the board would review that in June. It would go out for public comment the month of July, come back to you in early August. Remember that meeting is early for a request to recommend the 2027 to 2033 TIP. And then it would go later on in August for approval by the board. So that was a lot. I will stand for any questions. All right. Here's the motion.
Madam Chair, I would recommend that the RTAC approve the updates and program as described.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Tony.
Yeah.
We'll move to item 5D, recommend ranking for member services. Matt Carlson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Matt Carlson, Principal Planner here at Compass. This item is to recommend one member service request for the fiscal year 2027 Unified Planning and Work Program and Budget, and it is on page 32 of your packet. So the Unified Planning Work Program, or UPWP, is developed annually and contains information about Compass projects and tasks and available financial resources. It fulfills requirements and recommendations from the Federal Highway Administration and the Federal Transit Administration. It also includes additional member agencies' requests and support as our resources allow. In short, it's the Compass budget. Compass provides multiple services for our members, and providing staff assistance is one of the ways that we provide technical expertise. The UPWP requests are for assistance that takes more than 5 workdays of Compass staff time, and this year we solicited applications between January 28th to February 13th. New for this year, the UPWP member service request application process moved from the technical team to the resource development team. And members applying for this assistance now use the phase 1 application, which is the same application used for all of our application processes. Compass received one application from the West Ada School District. This assistance request will update and refine their student generation rate by analyzing new residential development permits over a 5-year period and comparing them to actual student enrollment. Using GIS, the project will establish a more accurate relationship between housing growth and student generation. This information is critical for forecasting future enrollment associated with development and aligning school planning decisions with long-range growth. And if approved, this assistance would be provided by the Compass technical team. If recommended today, Compass would work with West Ada School District to refine the scope of work and the number of workdays for the draft fiscal year 2027 UPWP. The request would then go before the Finance Committee in June. The Finance Committee would then recommend the draft fiscal year 2027 UPWP to the full board in July. The board would approve the UPWP in August, and then Compass staff and West Ada School District would then finalize the work plan and timeline in September, and then work would kick off in October. Are there any questions?
Is there a question online or is that chat? Okay.
How ADA specific is this? Do we anticipate these results would be significantly different for Canyon County?
Madam Chair, Jason, these would be specific to the West Ada School District boundaries. Is that correct? Madam Chair, if you have anything to offer, it was your request.
It is, West Ada School District serves most of Ada County and part of Nampa and Canyon County as well. So there'll be a small portion. I think it's 2.5 blocks. Other than that, it's mostly Ada County.
And is this just looking at the students in the public schools, or is this looking at all school-age children?
This is just students in public schools. It gets really difficult for us to quantify homeschool. There is not a agency out there that quantifies homeschool students. And so it becomes really difficult. Private schools are not required to report to the State Department of Education on their enrollments. So really the only information we have are charter schools and West Ada enrollment. So there's too many extra variables to try to cover everything.
Thank you.
All right, if there are no other questions, I have a recommended motion.
Madam Chair, I'd move that the RTAC recommends one FY27 member service request for consideration by Compass Finance Committee for inclusion in the FY27 Unified Planning Work Program and Budget.
Thank you, Steve.
I'll second that.
A second from Andrew. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We have one information-only item, a briefing on population estimate methodology.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of RTAC, Austin Miller, Principal Planner and Planning Team Lead here at Compass. This presentation, as noted, is an information item. I wanted to come to RTAC today and share information about our population estimate methodology for our draft 2026 population estimates, and then also go ahead and share those draft numbers with you all as well at the end of the presentation here today. Our population estimates, to be frank, are a lot of work. We have nearly 2,500 transportation analysis zones. Now, these zones are used for our transportation demand modeling efforts. However, they also, being the smallest geography we frequently work with, we use them for our demographic information as well. So we look at these nearly 2,500 geographic areas in our region and calculate population estimates for each and every one of them, which we feel has a tremendous benefit to you all, as it allows us to get really granular as we're looking at capital budgeting or things such as student enrollment. We can look at the population and permitting happening on a very granular scale rather than a broader region. With that said, a tremendous amount of credit to our team here at Compass, with there being so much permitting activity going on, as we'll get to here momentarily, and so such fine geographies that we calculate these estimates in. It is a tremendous amount of work, so I did just want to say thank you to members of our team and Marianne's team as well. She stepped away, but she puts a tremendous amount of effort into this process, so really appreciate all that support. Real high level, we'll dive into each of these elements a little bit more information, but in order to get our population estimates, we start with that decennial census, a number that we got from the Census Bureau, sort of setting our baseline, so to speak, for 2020. And then on that, we will add to it to account for population growth in the region based on new residential permitting data that we get from all of your building departments. So thank you for them for sharing that information with us. Household size that we get from the Census Bureau as well through their American Community Survey, and then residential occupancy rates to make sure we're not necessarily overcounting any homes that are actually just sitting vacant, haven't potentially been sold yet, or whatever the reason. Diving into each a little bit further, that decennial census, hopefully many of you are aware of that. Every 10 years, nation does a broad census. They provide those numbers to us. For the most part, we carry those forward. When we first got the numbers several years back, there were a few things that maybe just didn't make sense. Like we knew there was some level of population in a specific area that wasn't represented. So we did make some technical corrections about 5 years ago or so when we got that information. Also unique things to it. They would have certain areas with a population per household of 25 people we've seen. We didn't feel that was actually accurate, so didn't want to carry that forward. So we made a few corrections in the past. And then also items to be aware of is that this does include group quarters. So for those of you that have a university or a college in your area, it gets those dorms, assisted living facilities, the prison, items like that are included in this number as well. New residential units permitted. We, like I mentioned earlier, get this directly from your building departments, as all that data is collected in a little bit of a different fashion depending on each agency. We go through, consolidate all that data and standardize it on our end. And then we can report out how many new units are being permitted, what type of unit, and specifically where is it being located. So you can see sort of where we fell in 2025. We've been holding pretty steady over the last 6 years. If you go back, this is a high permitting number compared to where we were a few years prior. So Business is booming on that front, but that's nothing new to many of you all. Household size, touched on it briefly earlier, but the Census Bureau, through their American Community Survey, or ACS, they do provide 5-year averages for a person per household for a couple separate housing types, and we pulled this data from them at the citywide level. The housing types we get directly from the census are single-family detached, which is our predominant housing type here in the region. Also, multifamily and manufactured. We take those numbers directly from the census. There are 2 other housing types that we estimate population for at a slightly adjusted number. So we have our single family attached units, is what we call them. Ultimately, it is one housing unit on a parcel with a shared wall. As these units do tend to be a little bit smaller in terms of square footage, we didn't want to take the full single family detached person per household rate. So we reduce it a little bit and take 85% of that rate and apply it to these types of units. We also have accessory dwelling units are increased in their permitting activity as of late. A couple years back, we were assuming 1.1 persons per accessory dwelling unit. We've bumped that number up, I think 2 or 3 years ago, to 1.4 based on a study that had been done over in Oregon. While I know it's not Idaho, unfortunately, we haven't been able to find direct local data, so we're using them as a proxy to land where we currently sit with our accessory dwelling units. So you can see there is some variation across the region based on those housing types, and that's why it's important to be able to map, get the addresses, know where these units are being permitted, so we can apply the appropriate assumption for population to each housing unit. Then to occupancy rate. For this one, I wanted to really just pause for a moment and extend our gratitude to our partners over at Idaho Power. We've been working with them for several years now to provide what we feel is the most accurate local information on whether housing units are actually being occupied. They do so by electrical load usage being drawn from the site. So a connection can be made. However, if it's the occasional realtor showing the site, it'll be drawing some electricity, but nowhere near as much as if there's actually a family living and occupying that unit. So we've been getting information from them for a few years now. However, this year they've had some new staff who sort of took a new look at it, and they were able to dive a little bit deeper and provide some information that we found helpful. So Idaho Power was now able to provide occupancy rate information on a couple different housing types. So single family as separate from multifamily, so we can see how those differ. And we look at these, I believe I forgot to mention it earlier, at the zip code level rather than previously it was based on city. We were also able to differentiate between new service, so those connections that have been made in the last year, versus existing service, so homes that have been around for a couple years, a little bit more likely to be occupied. So you'll see that occupancy rate is higher for existing service than it is for the new service. And we can apply that appropriately based on when the building permit was issued for those units. Another key component for determining occupancy specific to multifamily housing is, frankly, sometimes construction on these projects can take a little bit longer. It'll, between when the building permit is issued to when occupancy is issued, there can be a couple year lag. So for our estimates, we don't necessarily want to go on the building permit being issued and just assuming all of those units are online. So us as staff, we do a little bit of monitoring, work with our demographic advisory work group to let us know, like, when are these buildings actually done with construction and should therefore be considered in our population estimates. Currently, we have approximately 1,700 multifamily housing units that have been permitted, yet we do not feel are actually occupiable at this point in time. And you can see it goes back at least to 2021. That number, I think, is important to know. 1,700 is notably lower than we've been in past years. That number was over 5,000 just 2 years ago. and we've been able to get it down. Some of our big projects, if you've been downtown Boise recently, construction has completed. Those units are starting to fill up. And that really bears itself in our permitting data as well. So you can see in 21, 22, 23, we really had a large volume of multifamily housing units all being permitted those years. However, they weren't being factored into our population estimates at those time. As construction has wrapped up, those units are starting to come online. So in some places, even though permitting activity this year may not have increased quite as much, you could see a little bit bigger of a jump in the population estimate because past permitted units are now viewed as construction is complete. They're now an occupiable unit. So we went real high level through our broad methodology, starting with the census, looking at how many new housing units we have brought online, how many people are assumed to live in those units, and how many of those units are assumed to be occupied. However, that doesn't actually apply to all of the Compass member agencies. So we do have Boise County as well, who became a Compass member a little over a year ago now. And we frankly don't have exactly all of the same amount of detail yet, as they are a newer member agency. The cities within Boise County are not Compass members. So we have had to sort of pivot a little bit with how we do their population estimates, but I did want to share that with the group as well. So what we did for this is we still looked at that 2020 decennial census number, and we also looked at the 2024 American Community Survey population estimate for Boise County and just carried that same growth rate forward to this point in time. And then we maintained the proportionate share of the cities within Boise County, with the exception of the city of Eagle, as the city of Eagle has started permitting. Some of the Avamore housing is now occurring in Boise County. We do assume that their proportionate share is increasing a little bit based on the increasing permitting activity that we do have that data for. So we do have that reflected in the Boise County estimates as well. So with that, it lands our population estimate. So for Ada and Canyon County combined, you're looking at over 875,000 people. And then if you add Boise County onto that as well, you're looking at almost 886,000 people for the 3-county region. Just going back when I first started here in 2023 was when I first did the population estimates. We were curious if we were going to break the 800,000 mark for Ada and Canyon County. Now we're quickly talking about when are we going to break that 900,000 mark. So as the building permit activity shows, and again, as no surprise to you all, we continue to keep growing rapidly here at Compass. We will continue to provide these population estimates and our development monitoring reports, share them out with you all so you can continue to see what growth is happening, not only in your communities, but in those neighboring communities around you, and use that data to hopefully inform your planning and budgeting efforts. So with that, I do have a question slide, but I think it might be a little bit better if I just hover here for a second. Glad to stand for any questions though.
Hi, Austin. Andrew with City of Eagle. I have a quick question. Does Compass do this annually? And if so, is there a way to get the rate of change year over year?
Madam Chair, Andrew, yes. So we do this as of April 1st each year. And in your packet, I did not admittedly label it the greatest, but on, I think it's attachment 2, I did throw a percentage next to each city's population growth. And that is that year over year rate. How much did Eagle, for example, grow from 2025 estimates to 2026 estimates? There's a couple different ways you can obviously slice and dice these if you're looking a certain amount, a period of time back. This is not something we have done in the past, or at least not necessarily provided outwardly. So if there's any way we can sort of help summarize information for either your city broadly, or if you, again, because we have the ability to get a little more granular, if you want to look at a specific area and see how that rate of change is occurring, please certainly reach out, let me know. Glad to dive into those weeds a little bit.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I'd be interested in the rates you use for the population for single family versus multifamily versus mobile home, having that information available.
Madam Chair, Jason, just to clarify, are you talking about the persons per household number for each of those? I can go back. I blazed through that slide just because there is so much information on it. Glad to, one, share it out broadly so you can look at where we stand. Oh shoot, did I go through it again? Sorry, somewhere in here. I did want to at least provide those numbers as a quick reference so you can see how they differed for each housing type as well as across cities.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Madam Chair. I guess I'm curious, I know Elmore County is not within Compass, but how are you guys looking at some of that on the border development and how it impacts these numbers?
Absolutely. Madam Chair, Nina, for Elmore County, we are, it's a little bit tricky, sort of like Boise County. We're limited as to what data we have. However, we are working with them to get more information as much as we can, certainly. And for population estimates, I do have a number sort of in my back pocket that was calculated the same way as Boise County's was. While we may not have building permit activity for them at this time, there's ways where we can get a general sense based on census data of what's going on in our surrounding counties.
All right, is there any other questions? Thank you, Austin.
Thank you.
In your packet, there's a couple of information, just status reports. And other than that, our next meeting will be April 22nd, 2026. Is there a motion to adjourn? Motion from Jason. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Steven. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Thank you so much. Have a good day.